On the sidelines of the 13th annual Kwita Izina ceremony, we spoke to the Senior Vice President for Africa Field Division at Conservation International, O'Brien Onyeka, on the role of non-government organizations towards conservation. Now, the SVP urges African governments and private sector to get involved as there is an urgent need for a paradigm shift.
Several organizations are doing a lot, but you need to understand that this is a demand and supply situation, right? On the one hand, there is the demand side, particularly in Asia, like China, Vietnam, Hong Kong, that are funding this push to extract ivory or rhino horns, ivory in the case of elephants, right? And then, on the other hand, you have the supply end, right? People who have the access, and this is exacerbated by corruption, by poverty. So if you are poor in a remote village and you are not deriving any benefit from ecotourism, it's for foreign tourists and so on, and the government, you're not benefiting it, and you are desperately poor, you may be tempted to show the route to poachers, right? So it's an organized criminal thing that is afflicting Africa that translates to 50 elephants killed. I wanted to give the context. So it's a lot of work with so many puzzles, missing puzzles, moving puzzles that we are all working to. And what I'm getting at is that it's not something that one sector alone can tackle. You need to address the issue of corruption, effective governance, effective enforcement on the ground, which NGOs don't have. We don't have an army, we don't have the police, we don't run the Kenya Wildlife Service or the Rwandan Wildlife Service. It's the government side that does that. So, but the government needs to create an enabling policy environment with strong enforcement, and then the NGOs can bring our creative thinking, innovation, and funding to support it. The private sector needs to play a role, because when you extract this ivory, it gets shipped. So who ships them? Either by air or by road or by sea. What is the role of logistics companies? So you see again, NGOs don't run logistic companies. So I wanted to highlight is that everyone makes the mistake of thinking when there is an issue like this, one organization should have dealt with it, but it's something that requires a collective effort from the state, private sector, and organized civil society.
Then we're still looking at a very big number of illegal loggers. Even in gazetted areas, trees are cut down for timber. But then if we're talking about conservation, shouldn't we be looking at the whole entire ecosystem, the natural habitats? What are a few of the things that have not been done that needs to be hastened to ensure that these conversations just don't end on paper or as words, but put into place?
I'm glad you raised this, because we have been historically looking at conservation in isolation, or what I call isolated conservation schemes. So you look at deforestation. When people talk about deforestation, they are only mostly looking at the trees being cut, but they forget that a lot of these trees are nitrogen-infusing trees. So when you remove them, you degrade the soil, which impacts agriculture. And then the cut trees impacts on air quality. What we have lacked historically in Africa is the science to drive conservation, to make a macroeconomic analysis of the true value of the ecosystem, that it brings good air quality, it helps with agriculture, and take a holistic approach to conservation rather than specie, either animal or tree specie focus, which is historically what we've been doing. My organization is trying to do this. We are driven by science. We come to a country and say, we don't want you to preserve your trees for preservation's sake. We will give you a science-based analysis of the contribution of your trees to your economy by looking at the whole value chain, that the trees allow the rivers to flow, that they allow a more steady, vibrant soil system that supports agriculture, and that if you lose these trees, you will lose X amount of other connected services, and we call it ecosystem services.
You're talking about environmental change, climate change, and you tell me about agriculture. And this sparks something in the back of my mind that maybe somehow science and research is not being given way to carry out its part or to play its role in these conversations. What is necessary at this point to see that when we talk conservation, when we talk growth, we talk science and research to get the numbers, to get the digits, to get all the information necessary to base these conversations?
Is to remove sentiments and sentimentalities from the issue of conservation, approach it from a business perspective. When there is flooding, last time there was a major flooding in Nairobi, the city lost close to $2 billion. Now, for a fraction of that cost, you could have implemented stringent environmental laws about drainage, about dumping and this, right? And you save yourself that money. For a fraction, for less than $1 million, you could have introduced an vibrant environmental legal protocol and system that benefits everybody, and the businesses and the government wouldn't have lost $2 billion. That's the approach we take. Whether you like environmental protection or not, I really don't mind. What I mind is that you look at your bottom line, and our job is to redraw the narrative to make it understandable that doing good is good for business. Protecting the environment is good for everybody.
Or maybe they just don't understand how business societies can actually benefit from this. So help me make a case. How do businesses, private sector, stand to benefit from conservation? And then that way, maybe everything will be smoother.
Supply chain. Address it, approach it from a supply chain perspective. Say you're a brewery company, Coca-Cola or whatever company. You rely on water. And not just any water, it has to be very clean water, because if not, you spend a lot more to purify it, right? So if you're extracting water from a volcano rock filtered water system, you are sitting pretty. But how are you sure that that water system, that water tower will continue to provide you that services for a very long time if you are not considering how the local communities are treating the ecosystem? If they cut the trees, the water table drops, the soil becomes degraded, you lose your supply, part of your supply chain, right? So whether you like conservation or not, we make the business case to businesses to say it's in your enlightened interest to ensure that you invest now for a fraction of the cost. Invest now to protecting those ecosystems. That's one of the things we are working with the Rwandese government to roll out a national system of ecosystem payment, where we map out the critical ecosystem, water towers and so on in the country, and who are the key beneficiaries, and begin to introduce a long-term innovative financing mechanism that allows for the government to derive payments for those systems and plough back the money into to protecting those ecosystems so that it will be there for as long as you can imagine.